Now, a big one. Crime and punishment. Then one of the judges of the city stood forth and said, "Speak to us of crime and punishment." And not the book by Dostoevsky, the idea of crime and punishment. So, little literary joke. Crime and Punishment, it's a Russian piece of literature by Dostoevsky. It's very thick, like most Russian books are, because the Russians were cold for 8 months out of the year because it snows 8 months out of the year and is cold 8 months out of the year. So all they did was sit inside and write books. And so Russian books are very, very thick. But getting back to this book that we're reading, "Speak to us of crime and punishment." And he answered, saying, "It is when your spirit goes wandering up on the wind, that you, alone and unguarded, commit a wrong unto others, and therefore unto yourself. And for that wrong committed must you knock and wait a while unheeded at the gate of the blessed. Like the ocean is your God self. It remains for the undefiled. And like the ether it lifts but the winged. Even like the sun is your God self. It knows not the ways of the mole, nor seeks its holes of the serpent. But your God self dwells not alone in your being. Much of you is still in man, and much of you is not yet in man, but a shapeless pygmy that walks asleep in the mist, searching for his own awakening. And the man in you would I now speak. For it is he, and not you, and not your God self, nor the pygmy in the mist, that knows crime and the punishment of crime. Oftentimes have I heard you speak of one who commits a wrong as though he were not one of you, but a stranger unto you and an intruder upon your world. But I say that even as the holy and righteous cannot rise beyond the highest which is each one of you, so the wicked and also the weak cannot fall lower than the lowest of which of you is also. And as a single leaf turns not yellow but with the silent knowledge of the whole tree, so the wrongdoer cannot do wrong without the hidden will of you all. Like a procession, you walk together towards your God self. You are the way and the wayfarers. And when one of you falls down, he falls for those behind him, a caution against the stumbling stone. Aye, and if he falls, for those ahead of him, who thought faster and surer of foot, yet move not the stumbling stone. And this also, though the world lie heavy upon your hearts, the murdered is not unaccountable for his own murder, and the robbed is not blameless in being robbed. The righteous is not innocent of the deeds of the wicked, and the white-handed is not clean of the doings of the felon. Yet the guilty is oftentimes the victims of the injured, and still more of the condemned is the burden-bearer for the guiltless and unblamed. You cannot separate the just from the unjust, and the good from the wicked, for they stand together before the face of the sun, even as the black thread and the white are woven together. And when the black thread breaks, the weaver shall look into it the whole cloth, and he shall examine the loom also. If any of you would bring to judgment an unfaithful wife, let him also weigh the heart of her husband in the scales, and measure his soul with measurements. And let him who would lash the offender look unto the spirit of the offended. And if any of you would punish in the name of righteousness, and lay the axe unto the evil tree, let him see to its roots. And verily he will find in the roots the good and the bad, the fruitful and the fruitless, all entwined together in the silent heart of the earth. And you judges who would be just, what judgment pronounce you upon him who, though honest in the flesh, yet is a thief in the spirit? What penalty lay you upon him who slays in the flesh, yet is himself slain in the spirit? And how prosecute you him who is in action a deceiver and an oppressor, yet who is also aggravated and outraged? And how shall you punish those who remorse and already greater than their mindsets? And how shall you punish those who remorse is already greater in their misdeeds? Is not remorse the justice which is administered by that very law which you would fain serve? Yet you cannot lay remorse upon the innocent, nor lift it from the heart of the guilty. Unbidden shall it call in the night. The men may wake and gaze upon themselves. And you who would understand justice, how shall you, unless you look upon all your deeds in the fullness of light? Only then shall you know that the erect and the fallen are but one man standing in twilight between the night of his pygmy self and the day of his God self. And then the cornerstone of the temple is not higher than the lowest stone in its foundation. That's a good one. It's a little bit longer, but there's a lot to dissect here, so let's talk about it. There's a really great analogy here that I'm going to use another poet to draw on. Give me 1 second here while I pull this book from my shelf. Talked about him earlier, but Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe has an excellent poem called The Imp of the Perverse. And The Imp of the Perverse is an excellent, excellent poem. And I'm not going to read it to you right here, but I wanted to pull this out for dramatic effect. But I'm going to set it down over here. The Imp of the Perverse is a story about a guy that's basically gone insane and murdered somebody. And he talks about the inner turmoil that we feel between being demented and evil and being good and righteous. And so when Gibran is talking about the pygmy self and the God self, the pygmy self is, giving into your evil desires and doing evil, and your God self is walking the path of righteousness. And so that's a good analogy here, and it's kind of interesting to see two poets kind of talk about these at completely separate times and completely separate areas. So if you want to read more on this notion, definitely check out The Imp of the Perverse by Edgar Allan Poe. But getting back to our good friend Mr. Khalil Gibran, there's another thing that I want to draw your attention to here, and he talks about the unilateralness of crime, and that we live in a society. I'm not going to make that weird joke, but life is hard. The world is hard. And before I say anything else, I don't want to sound like an apologist. I don't want to say that people don't deserve justice, or I don't mean to say that people that do bad things shouldn't answer for their crimes. They most certainly should. But what I'm saying here is that there may be some factors at play as part of the greater community or society that somebody lives in that can play towards their being convicted of a crime or them committing a crime. Now notice that I'd say two things there. There's being convicted of a crime and there's committing a crime. People commit crimes all the time and aren't convicted, and people are convicted of crimes that they never do. And so not only do you have to examine the traits that would drive somebody to commit a crime, things like revenge, infidelity, rage, frustration, all these other things, but you have to also consider the societal consequences of things like systematic racism, oppression, all these systems in place that can convict somebody on circumstantial basis or circumstantial evidence without any real proof. And all of these problems cumulatively are the black and the white thread that Gibran is talking about. So good people are intertwined with bad people. We live in a world where there are some bad people that commit bad crimes, but it's on the good people to shape society and to make the world a better place so that those bad people are few and far between. And if there are bad people, then we put a focus on not just putting them away and making them suffer, but instead rehabilitating them and fixing the problems that may have driven them to do wrongful things. And it's really hard to get a grasp of this because in Western culture, we are so fixated on justice and righteousness and, oh, I'm going to make him pay, or I'm going to go mess that guy up for doing this thing to me. Like, I have to right the wrongs and everything like that. It's really frustrating. That's a very frustrating and a very short-handed way of saying things. And again, I'm not saying that if a crime is committed against you that you shouldn't seek justice. You certainly should. But there is a imbalance between the amount of righteousness that we seek in Western culture and the amount of wrongdoing. People want to seek infinite judgment or infinite retribution for finite lapses in judgment or finite problems, or finite crimes, I should say. And that's why we have a code of laws and we have like minimum sentencing and things like that so that we can quantify the amount of recompense or the amount of debt that people have to pay back to society through prison or community service and things like that. But we don't often put focus on what happens in that time. Like community service and going to prison and stuff like that, those are meant to be real rehabilitative tools. Those are meant to be times where you can think about what you did and make the decision to become a better person or get the help that you need to become better. But we don't hear about this at all in Western culture, sadly, because people often... The prison system here in the United States, for one, is completely backwards, and I could spend a whole 3 hours talking about that and not even scratch the surface. But I'll keep it short and say that the American justice system or the American prison system isn't focused on rehabilitating people. It is focused on recidivism and seeing if there are ways to make repeat offenders so that you can continue to use them for basically slave labor in the imprisoned industrial complex, or to kind of just put your problems away and sweep it under the rug without addressing the societal issues like people being criminally insane at times, or rampant sexual abuse in the world that's causing people to, have deviant sexual behavior and things like that that can eventually lead into crime. So we don't want to fix those problems. We just want to sweep them under the rug, and prison is that metaphorical rug. But if you look at other places in the world, like Japan's a great system, at least in my opinion, because Japan puts a lot of focus on rehabilitation, especially with juvenile crimes. Like juvenile crimes in Japan are very heavily like, hey, let's get you in rehabilitation. Let's not like send you to prison, and let's not have you like feel in a cage and like feel the existential dread of being cooped up in a cell when you're only 15 or 16 years old. Like, let's work on rehabilitation and making sure that you can still be a productive member of society later in life. For minor crimes, of course. Obviously, if it's a major crime, then prison is pretty much all that there is. But yeah, all that's to say, the black thread and the white thread. Let's talk about it. Hey, Drew, hope you're doing all right. Thank you so much, Major B. Thank you for stopping by. So, pretty existential stuff. And I was just talking about how the Western judicial system is really focused on kind of sweeping problems under the rug. And in some cases that works. But we should really put our focus on rehabilitating people who go to jail and things like that, or, people that commit crimes. We should work on rehabilitating them when we can. Because as Gibran says, the black and the white thread are intertwined. Good people and bad people are intertwined. And it's on the good people to fix the problems in society that are maybe aiding and abetting bad people to doing bad things. So yeah, that's Crime and Punishment and my long soliloquy on justice. So